They had tied a faded ribbon to the wooden post in the town square, the kind of ribbon once used for celebrations, but now dulled by dust and shame. And beneath it stood a widow clutching her baby like the last piece of her soul, while men gathered not with flowers or kindness, but with numbers in their eyes. Because this wasn't a wedding or a market day, this was an auction. And everyone knew it, even if no one dared say the word out loud. Her name was Clara Mayfield, widowed at 22 by a river that rose too fast and a husband who never came home. And the baby in her arms, little Eli, was barely 6 months old. His tiny fingers curled into the fabric of her worn dress as if he sensed the danger in the air, as if he understood that today the world had decided they were burdens, to be passed along to the highest bidder, because the landowner claimed she owed debts she could never repay, and the town council claimed this was the only solution, and the crowd murmured with a strange mix of curiosity and discomfort, some women looking away, some men pretending this was no different than selling cattle, while Clara stood still, spine straight, tears refusing to fall because she had cried all the tears. Already on the night she rocked, he lied to sleep, wondering if love alone could keep them alive. The auctioneer cleared his throat and began calling out terms: food, shelter, labor, as if she were a contract and not a human being. And bids came slow at first, hesitant, insulting, men offering scraps of security in exchange for ownership. And every offer felt like another nail driven into her dignity, her arms tightening around her baby as whispers cut through the air about her being used goods and too much trouble, until the baby whimpered and she bent her head to kiss his forehead, whispering promises she wasn't sure she could keep, promising him she would survive this somehow, even as her heart broke piece by piece. The sun hung low, casting long shadows that made the square feel like a courtroom without mercy, and just as the auctioneer raised his voice to call the next offer, the sound of hooves thundered in from the road, sharp and sudden, slicing through the murmurs like a blade. And heads turned as a lone cowboy rode into the square late, dust-coated, broad-shouldered, his hat pulled low but his presence undeniable. A man who looked like he had come straight from miles of hard land and harder living. And when he swung down from his horse, silence fell heavier than any shout, because there was something in the way he stood, calm, unafraid, unhurried, that told everyone he wasn't there to bargain scraps. Clara lifted her eyes for the first time, meeting his gaze, and in that instant she saw no hunger, no calculation, only a quiet fire and a steadiness she hadn't felt since her husband died. And when the auctioneer scoffed and said they were nearly finished, the cowboy spoke, his voice deep and clear, carrying across the square with a weight that made men straighten their backs, saying simply, "I'll take them," and gasps rippled through the crowd because he hadn't said her or the baby, but them, as if they were already a family. And the auctioneer laughed nervously, asking if he understood the terms, the responsibility, the cost. And the cowboy stepped forward, boots heavy on the dirt, eyes never leaving Clara or the child in her arms, and said, "I understand enough to know. No one here has the right to sell a mother and her son like property." And some men protested, some mocked, but others shifted uncomfortably because the truth hit too close. And when the landowner demanded payment, the cowboy reached into his saddlebag and placed a thick pouch of coins on the table, the sound of metal ringing louder than the auctioneer's voice. And then he did something no one expected. He turned to Clara, lowered himself slightly so he wasn't towering over her, and said softly, "You don't owe me anything. You don't belong to me. But if you'll come with me, I'll make sure you're safe." And for the first time that day, Clara felt something rise in her chest that wasn't fear, and as she looked at the crowd that had been ready to trade her life away and then back at the man who arrived late but stood like he had always been meant to be there, she realized sometimes hope doesn't come gently. It comes riding hard and unexpected. And as they walked away together amid stunned silence, the baby quiet in her arms, she didn't know what awaited her beyond the road. but she knew she had just witnessed the moment when fate chose mercy over cruelty. And if this story is already stirring something inside you, if you believe in second chances and unexpected heroes, the ride away from the town square felt unreal. The sound of hooves steady beneath Clara as she sat behind the cowboy, her arms wrapped around Eli and her heart pounding with a mix of fear and fragile hope. The town shrinking behind them like a bad dream she wasn't sure she'd fully woken from. And the cowboy, whose name she learned was Jacob Hale, said little as the road stretched long and quiet. Not because he was cold, but because some promises don't need many words. And when they finally reached his ranch, tucked between rolling hills and open sky, Clara saw a place worn by time, yet held together by care. A small house with a smoking chimney, a barn standing strong against the wind, and land that spoke of honest work rather than wealth. And Jacob helped her down gently, as if she was something precious, not fragile but worthy of respect. And inside the house was warmth, not just from the fire, but from the absence of judgment. And over the following days, Clara waited for the price she assumed would come, the demands, the expectations, the unspoken ownership, but none arrived, because Jacob treated her not as something he bought, but as someone he chose to protect, giving her space, work she could do with dignity, and time to heal, and the baby began to laugh. Again, his laughter filling the small rooms with a sound that felt like life returning. And slowly Clara learned Jacob's story too, of losses carved deep, of a wife taken by illness years ago, and a loneliness he carried quietly. And she realized he had not saved her to fill a void, but because he understood what it meant to lose everything and still stand. And when rumors spread through neighboring towns about the cowboy who bought a widow only to give her freedom, people came with curiosity and left with humility, because kindness like that unsettles those who profit from cruelty. And one evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the land gold, Clara stood watching Jacob repair a fence while Eli slept against her chest. And she understood that love doesn't always arrive as romance. Sometimes it arrives as safety, as consistency, as someone showing up when everyone else looks away. And when Jacob finally spoke of the future, he did so without pressure, saying only that if she chose to stay, she would have a home, and if she chose to leave, she would have his help. And tears finally fell then, not from fear but from gratitude, because for the first time since her husband died, someone had given her choice back, and she chose to stay, not because she was bought, not because she was desperate, but because hope had taken root in honest ground. And as seasons passed, the ranch grew livelier, laughter replacing silence, trust replacing shame. And the town that once tried to sell her now spoke her name with respect, because redemption has a way of rewriting stories. And when Clara finally stood beside Jacob, not as a widow or a burden, but as a partner, she knew the moment that saved her began, when one man arrived late and refused to play along with cruelty. And if this story moved you, if it reminded you that humanity still matters and courage still exists, then subscribe to this channel and stay with us. Because every story you hear, here is a reminder that even when the world tries to put a price on your worth, someone somewhere will see you as priceless. Remember to subscribe to this channel